If you're seeing this, it's not random. It never is. What if I told you that something in the field is tapping your attention right now because you're standing at a threshold, one of those quiet, easily missed crossroads where a small shift in your internal state alters the entire direction of your timeline? And what if I told you that before midnight, a kind of test unfolds, not a punishment, not a threat, but the same kind of test Nikola Tesla hinted at when he spoke of frequency, vibration, and resonance as the true keys to understanding reality? This test isn't coming from outside. It arises from the very edges of your perception, from the places where you know something must change but haven't yet found the bridge to step across. If you're seeing this, you're already in the middle of that invisible exam. It shows up as the subtle tension in your chest when you think of the next step, the uncertainty that flickers at the edge of decisions, the way time feels heavier or lighter depending on the thoughts you entertain. Midnight isn't a superstition here, it's a metaphor for the moment when one version of you dissolves and another steps forward. And the realignment isn't about perfection or correcting flaws. It's about tuning yourself the way Tesla tuned his machines to resonance, when he said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." He wasn't offering a poetic aphorism, he was giving instructions for living with coherence. Right now, as you listen, you're vibrating in a certain pattern. It's encoded in your breath, your posture, the micro expressions you'll never see on your own face. And the test you're facing is simple. Will you continue broadcasting the same old pattern, or will you realign before the day resets its frequency? This is not about urgency or fear. It's about timing. The same way a musician knows there's a precise moment to pluck the string so the note rings true. Your life has its own rhythm, its own electric hum, and you've been drifting slightly out of tune. You can feel it. Moments take more effort than they should. Clarity slips through your fingers. Choices feel heavier than they need to be. These are not failures. They're signals. In the quantum nexus metaphor, reality is not a rigid structure. It's a field that mirrors your state. You're not being judged by the universe. You're being echoed. And right now, the echo is soft but insistent. It's saying, slow down. Notice the space between your thoughts. Notice the breath you just took without awareness. Notice how quickly your mind wants to rush to the next obligation. Tesla believed that the world is a kind of living circuitry, and if that's true, then so are you. When you misalign, the current weakens. When you realign, the current sings. The stakes aren't catastrophic, they're subtle. If you drift past midnight in the same unconscious state, nothing terrible happens except that you repeat the same loop tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. But if you realign before midnight, even by a few degrees, you shift the entire trajectory of your next cycle. Think of it like adjusting the path of a beam of light. A 1-degree shift here becomes miles of difference later, and all of this begins with the simplest act: becoming aware of the state you're broadcasting right now. If you're seeing this, the field is offering you a doorway. The question is whether you'll step through it. And to do that, we need to uncover why so many people stay stuck in the same pattern, repeating the same emotional frequencies, never understanding the mechanism behind their own reality loop. Let's go there. You already know what a reality loop feels like, even if you never named it. You wake into a new day, yet the emotional climate feels recycled. The same tightness when you open your phone, the same heaviness before work, the same background worry that hums no matter what you accomplish. It is not a sign that you are lazy, cursed, or behind. It is a sign that your system has learned a particular internal frequency and keeps returning there. Like one of Tesla's oscillators, once it locks onto a rhythm, it will hum on that setting by default unless something conscious retunes it. If we slow your everyday experience down, the mechanism of the loop becomes clear. A trigger appears, a number on a screen, a delayed reply, a tone in someone's voice. Before you consciously think about it, your breath reacts. It shortens, tightens, or pauses, and that small change shifts your internal state. Muscles brace, attention narrows. From inside that state, the mind reaches for old conclusions. I'm behind again. They don't care. I always mess this up. These thoughts feel like insight, but they are recordings. From them, familiar actions follow almost automatically. You hesitate, you over-explain, you shut down, or you distract yourself. Those actions create new evidence, another missed chance, another strained exchange, another evening spent avoiding what matters. The evidence then feeds back into the story. Trigger, breath, state, meaning, action, evidence. Another orbit completed. The deeper crisis is that, over time, the loop begins to impersonate reality itself. After enough repetitions, yesterday's state feels like just who I am, and the knot in your chest starts to look like proof that nothing can change. Meanwhile, the field around you, the living web of people, timing, and opportunities keeps organizing itself around the signal you are broadcasting. You unconsciously choose safer options, and life appears to never open. You tense before speaking, and others sense distance. From inside that echo chamber, it is easy to believe in bad luck, or a universe that does not respond. Underneath, something simpler is happening. The same internal pattern keeps being encoded, and the field keeps faithfully reflecting it back. Imagine yourself standing on a bridge over a dark river. The river is your stream of experience. Messages, conversations, invoices, surprises, all flowing beneath you. In your hand is a flashlight. That beam is your state. When your breath is tight and your body is braced, the beam becomes narrow and harsh. You mainly see debris and dangerous currents. From that angle, the story, life is unsafe and disappointing, feels reasonable. You are not imagining what you see. You are looking through a very specific slice of reality. The loop is not only what passes in the water, it is the way you keep aiming the light at the same sections of the river while telling yourself, this is just how the river is. Tesla's language of energy, frequency, and vibration was not a mystical slogan. It was engineering. A small mismatch in frequency can keep an entire device from resonating. In the same way, a small mismatch between your deeper nature and your habitual emotional setting can make life feel like static. You can be taking the right outer steps while your inner oscillator is still tuned to an old broadcast of fear or scarcity. Midnight comes, you sleep, and in the hazy minute after waking, your body quietly dials you back to that familiar station before you have even remembered your intentions. This is the perceptual crisis. You have learned to trust the loop more than the living field that moves through you, and each day offers a silent test at the point where the loop becomes obvious, and you decide, consciously or not, whether to renew it. You know that moment. You hear yourself repeating the same complaint and, for one clear second, something in you does not fully believe it. You feel the familiar wave of anxiety rise, and another part of you quietly says, wait. In that sliver of honesty, you realize, if I continue like this, I already know how tomorrow will feel. That recognition is the real test, not forcing perfect thoughts, but staying with that clarity long enough to choose a different alignment. In the quantum nexus metaphor, the field does not punish loops. It simply reflects them until you step into the role of observer. The moment you notice the sequence, instead of being swept inside it, a small gap appears, and that gap is where realignment lives. This is educational, not medical. We are speaking about patterns of awareness, not diagnosing anything. From here, a question opens. What shifts in the inner physics of your experience when you inhabit that observer and treat life as a responsive field rather than a fixed script? That is the quantum idea we turn to next. To understand what actually changes when you begin observing rather than reacting, you have to feel into the subtle mechanics of the moment, not the equations. Think of the observer effect not as a scientific claim, but as a mirror for your lived experience. When you look at something truly look at it, you change your relationship to it. And when you look at your own inner world with awareness rather than autopilot, you change your relationship to your entire reality. Most people think the quantum idea is about particles and probabilities, but in your life, the particle is simply the next moment, and the probability field is the wide range of ways that moment could unfold depending on the state you bring to it. You've experienced this countless times. You walk into a room in a hurried, contracted state, and the conversation feels tight, even if nothing is wrong. You enter the same room on a day when your breath feels open and your awareness is expansive, and suddenly people smile more easily, obstacles soften, and ideas come more naturally. Nothing objectively changed about the room. What changed was the inner frequency you carried into it, and the field around you reorganized accordingly. That is the observer effect, translated into the language of your own nervous system. When you shift state, the probabilities shift with you. In quantum nexus terms, coherence isn't a mystical trait, It's the felt sense of your body, breath, and attention moving in the same direction. When your breath is tight but your mind is trying to be optimistic, you feel out of tune. When your thoughts spiral but your chest wants calm, you feel fragmented. But when breath slows, attention widens, and the body softens, something inside you clicks into alignment, like two frequencies finally resonating. This coherent state doesn't guarantee that every external event will go smoothly. Life is still dynamic, but it compresses the gap between intention and experience. More of what you're seeking becomes available, and less energy leaks into old narratives. You feel centered, not by controlling the world, but by finding the still point inside you, from which the world becomes more navigable. Tesla intuited this when he insisted that reality responds to vibration. He wasn't talking about chanting or forced positivity. He was pointing to the tone of your presence. Every internal state carries a tone. Tension has a sharp, narrow tone. Calm has a warm, spacious tone. Clarity has a steadier tone that others feel even if they cannot explain how. When you shift your tone, you shift how people perceive you, how opportunities appear, how timing flows. Even your own thoughts change nature when your tone shifts. A problem that felt immovable can suddenly look workable from a coherent state. Imagine standing at the riverbank again. The flowing water, the events of your life did not stop. But because the beam of your awareness has softened and widened, you see more of the river at once. Instead of fixating on the turbulence, you notice the calmer currents along the edges. Options that were invisible during panic become clear. The river didn't change, your observer did. And that small shift in how you see changes what you choose, and what you choose changes the next set of possibilities that unfold. The quantum metaphor becomes deeply human in these moments. When you're reactive, your world collapses to a single storyline. This is happening to me. Options narrow, probabilities tighten. When you step back into the observer, the storyline loosens. Suddenly there are multiple directions the moment could evolve. Your awareness becomes the space in which these possibilities unfold, rather than the thing getting bounced around inside them. The more coherent your inner state, the more gracefully you can choose which possibility to stabilize. This is what people often describe as intuition, alignment, or flow, but underneath, it's simply the physics of awareness at work. You've felt this most clearly in moments of stillness, those rare times when your breath slows on its own, when the mind softens, when you feel present in your own body without effort. In that state, the world feels different. Sound has more texture, colors seem richer, and even your posture shifts slightly forward, as though the next step is less heavy. In these states, you're not just observing life. You are participating in it in a way that feels both intentional and effortless. This is the emotional essence of the observer effect. Awareness does not force reality to change. Awareness invites reality to reveal more of itself. Consider a moment of genuine presence, perhaps looking at the night sky, or listening to someone you love, or feeling the quiet after a difficult day. In that presence, your inner turbulence pauses. The narrative in your mind quiets, and in that quiet, something remarkable happens. You feel more connected to life, not because you solved anything, but because you stopped wrestling the moment. This is coherence. This is alignment. This is the point where old loops lose their power because you're no longer feeding them with unconscious tension. The field around you feels this shift, not as magic, but as resonance. When you're coherent, others sense spaciousness instead of urgency. When you're grounded, decisions come more naturally. When you're observing rather than bracing, you notice opportunities that match this calm clarity. In this way, the quantum idea becomes a practical guide. Observe your state, shift your breath, widen your awareness, and the probabilities in your life begin to reorganize. But long before quantum theory, ancient traditions already spoke about this shift in their own language doorways, thresholds, sky, and clouds. The breath is the bridge between worlds. To deepen this understanding, we turn to the wisdom of those ancient metaphors next. Long before anyone used words like quantum field or observer effect, ancient cultures mapped the inner landscape through symbols, stories, and sacred metaphors. They didn't have particle diagrams, but they had sky and cloud, desert and temple, breath and silence. And strangely, these metaphors describe your lived experience far more precisely than many modern theories. To understand what happens when you realign before midnight, It helps to step into one of these older ways of knowing because they speak directly to the threshold you're standing on now. Imagine Egypt at dusk. The air turns gold, the stones of the temples breathe out the heat they've gathered through the day, and the Nile carries a slow, luminous current beneath the rising stars. Egyptian initiates believed that reality itself was a series of thresholds, each one functioning like a doorway between states of consciousness. They called these thresholds gates, not because they were physical locations, but because they were inner crossings, moments where the old self could not follow, and the emerging self stepped forward if the seeker was aligned enough to pass through. In their view, what we call a test wasn't a judgment from a god. It was a natural moment of alignment, the way a key must match a lock before the mechanism turns. You are standing at such a gate now. Midnight is simply its symbol, the turning of one cycle into another. The ancient Egyptians taught that when a person stood at a threshold, their breath revealed whether they were ready. A scattered breath meant the seeker was still entangled in old patterns. A steady, coherent breath meant they were inhabiting the awareness needed to step through. They didn't use the language of coherence, but they described the same shift, the heart becoming light enough to pass Ma'at's feather of truth. Not moral purity presence, not perfection alignment. Ma'at was more than a goddess. She was the principle that reality responds to your inner state. If your inner world is heavy with fear, the outer world feels dense and unforgiving. If your inner world is balanced, spacious, and aligned, the outer world arranges itself differently. The feather in this myth is a beautiful metaphor for your breath. It rises, falls, guides, and reveals your inner weight. When you become aware of the breath, you're not just calming your body, you're aligning with the field in a way ancient initiates would recognize instantly. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, early Buddhist practitioners explored a different doorway, anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing. But they didn't treat breath as a technique, they treated it as a bridge. They described consciousness not as a thing inside the mind, but as a sky vast, open, and unchanging. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations were clouds drifting across this sky. Some dark, some light, all temporary. The training wasn't to force the clouds away. It was simply to recognize, I am the sky, not the cloud. This recognition dissolved suffering not through control, but through clarity. This is the same clarity you taste when you observe your breath without trying to fix anything. The moment you notice that your anxious thought is just a cloud moving across awareness, your relationship to it changes. You no longer cling or push. You witness. And in that witnessing, the thought loses its power. The Buddha didn't talk about quantum collapse, but he described the same phenomenon. Observation transforms the experience. Clouds rearrange. The sky becomes visible again. Probabilities shift. Kabbalah goes even deeper into the metaphor of breath and consciousness, using the terms ruach and neshama. Ruach is the breath-like movement of emotion, and thought the swirling weather of your inner world. Neshama is the still, luminous awareness beneath it, the witnessing presence that never changes. In Kabbalistic understanding, your task is not to eliminate ruach, but to align it with neshama, the way a musician tunes an instrument to match a resonant tone. When the two align, your actions move with clarity, your decisions feel guided, your life feels less like pushing through resistance and more like being carried by a current that already knows where you're going. This alignment mirrors what we now call coherence. You can feel the difference immediately. When you're in ruach without awareness, life feels chaotic and reactive. When you arise from neshama, the world becomes quieter, more spacious, more responsive. You become the witness, not the storm. And from that witnessing, you choose differently. Your breath steadies, your posture shifts, the field around you responds. These ancient metaphors aren't ornamental, they are maps. The Egyptian gate, the Buddhist sky, the Kabbalistic breath, they all point to the same truth. You exist at the intersection of two worlds, the inner world of awareness and the outer world that mirrors it. When the inner world is unconscious, the outer world feels random and heavy. When the inner world becomes coherent, the outer world reorganizes. You've felt this before, moments when you were deeply present, and suddenly life felt luminous, as though something larger was moving with you. These moments weren't accidents. They were thresholds. You crossed briefly into alignment. the same way ancient seekers stepped into their inner temples. The real question is not whether you've experienced this. It's whether you can learn to stabilize it. Because realignment before midnight isn't about thinking positive or acting spiritual. It's about remembering that you are always standing in front of a gate, whether you notice it or not. And the key to that gate isn't effort, it's awareness. But awareness needs a practice to anchor it. So now that you've understood the ancient metaphors that describe this shift, we step into the direct experience. A practice that trains you to enter coherence on command, gently and repeatably. Before we move into this practice, remember, this is educational, contemplative, and metaphorical. It is not a medical technique or a substitute for professional care. What we're exploring here is awareness, the way breath, attention, and inner state create the tone you bring into each moment. Think of this as learning to tune an instrument, not fix a machine. The intention is gentleness, not control. Begin by simply sitting as you are. No posture to perfect, no performance to achieve. Let your body settle in its natural gravity. You're not trying to rise above anything. You're letting yourself inhabit the moment in the same way ancient seekers stepped into their inner chambers, slowly, intentionally. Bring your attention to the sensation of the breath moving through your nose, not deep, not forced, just the honest breath you're already breathing. Feel the coolness as you inhale, the warmth as you exhale. This is your first doorway. Now, soften your awareness around the breath, almost the way you would soften your eyes when looking at a distant horizon. Notice that you're not breathing alone. Life is breathing you. Each inhale arrives without being summoned. Each exhale releases without being commanded. In this recognition, something quiet begins to open. The shift from doing the breath to witnessing the breath. That witnessing is the observer awakening. Next, feel into the body's subtle signals. Notice the chest. Is it tight, open, neutral? Don't change it. Just listen. Notice the stomach. Fluttering, calm, held. Again. No correction, just awareness. Notice the shoulders. Lifted, heavy, relaxed. Each sensation is not a problem, but a message. Ancient traditions spoke of these inner signals as whispers of the inner temple. They believed tension was not an enemy, but a doorway to understanding what has been carried too long. Now, bring your attention to the pause between breaths. Not a breath hold, just the natural micro-gap that appears after the inhale before the exhale begins, and again after the exhale before the next inhale. These tiny still points are your second doorway. They're like the empty chambers in the Egyptian temples where silence was considered a teacher. Spend a few cycles here. Inhale, notice the pause. Exhale, notice the pause. This is where the inner frequency recalibrates. From here, shift into what I call oval breathing. Imagine your breath tracing an oval shape inside your torso. Up the back on the inhale, down the front on the exhale. You're not forcing anything. You're giving the breath a gentle path to follow. This creates coherence without pressure. In yogic terms, it balances ruach and neshama. In Buddhist terms, it widens the sky. In quantum nexus terms, it settles the internal frequency so the outer field can respond with greater clarity. Let's anchor this practice with 3 micro protocols you can use throughout your day. No rituals, no equipment, only awareness. The first is the 2-breath reset. Anytime you feel pulled into an old loop, pause for exactly 2 conscious breaths. 1 breath to notice your current state, another to choose your next frequency. That's it. This interrupts the automatic sequence before it becomes a spiral. The second is the doorway scan. Every time you walk through a literal doorway into a room, out of a building, into a car, let it trigger a 2-second awareness check. Notice your posture, your breath, your emotional weather. Doorways are thresholds, and treating them that way slowly retrains the nervous system to shift states rather than carry old ones forward. Egyptian initiates used physical gateways in exactly this way, to re-enter themselves before entering a new space. The third is the 3 points of contact. When confusion rises, place your awareness on 3 physical anchors: the feet on the ground, the breath in the chest, and the air around your skin. These 3 points bring you instantly back into the body and out of the cognitive storm. Buddhists use this as a grounding technique. Kabbalists described it as returning to the breath of the world. Tesla would have called it re-entering the circuit. Notice what is happening now. The breath has slowed without instruction. The body is less armored. The mind has more space. There is a quiet intelligence here that doesn't need explaining. This is coherence in real time, the alignment of awareness, breath, and presence. When you sit in this state, even briefly, you're not escaping life. You're tuning the signal through which you will meet life. And from this place, something profound becomes possible. You can shift from a life shaped by old loops into a life shaped by conscious choice. To understand what this shift looks like in action, how it changes your money, your relationships, and your leadership, you need to see how the turning point unfolds when the observer becomes the creator. That's where we go next. There comes a moment in every inner journey when something subtle but irreversible clicks into place. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough or a revelation. It feels more like a quiet reordering, an exhale that sinks deeper, a posture that softens, a thought that used to grip you now dissolving before it forms. This is the turning point. The shift from being shaped by circumstances to shaping your relationship with them. The observer begins to take the steering wheel from the unconscious patterns that once dictated your reactions. You move from victim to creator, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because your inner state stops being held hostage by external events. This shift doesn't happen through force. It happens through coherence. When your breath steadies, your perception widens, and your inner frequency aligns, the story you tell about your life changes. And when the story changes, the strategies that arise from that story transform with it. Someone in the reactive loop asks, "How do I stop this from happening to me?" But someone rooted in awareness asks, "What is this moment offering me?" That single shift, state to story, to strategy, reshapes the next chapter of your life. To make this transformation tangible, imagine 3 scenes from your own reality: money, relationships, and leadership. These aren't abstract categories. They are the arenas where your old patterns become most visible, and your new coherence becomes most powerful. In the first scene, money, you may know the feeling of tightening inside the chest when bills arrive, or when a new opportunity presents itself. That contraction is ruach, the swirling weather of emotion. In reactive mode, the story becomes, "I don't have enough," or "I can't trust this," leading to strategies shaped by fear, hesitation, overwork, impulsive decisions, avoidance. But when you bring the observer online with 2 conscious breaths, with oval breathing, with the awareness of the sky behind the clouds, your state shifts. The story becomes, "I'm capable of meeting this moment," or "Let's see what this is asking of me." From that story, new strategies arise. You ask clearer questions. You negotiate from steadiness. You pause before agreeing. You follow intuitive openings that would have been invisible in panic. The money situation may not magically resolve in that instant, but you transform, and the field reorganizes accordingly. Clarity attracts clarity. In the second scene, relationships, the loop can be even stronger. A tone of voice, a delayed reply, a misunderstanding can activate old narratives instantly. In reactive mode, the story becomes, "I'm not valued," or "They're upset with me," or "I always ruin things," leading to strategies like over-explaining, withdrawing, or retaliating. But when coherence steps in, breath becomes the bridge. 2 breaths break the loop. The sky opens. The story shifts to, "Let me stay present," or even, "This discomfort is showing me where I've abandoned myself." The strategy becomes communication rather than defensiveness, curiosity instead of blame, boundaries rather than collapse. In this way, relationships begin to reflect your coherence rather than your fear. The third scene, leadership, is where this shift becomes most visible. Leadership isn't about titles. It's about the way your presence influences any space you enter. In reactive mode, leadership becomes control, trying to fix, manage, or force outcomes. The story becomes, "Everything depends on me," or "If I don't take charge, things fall apart." But in the coherent state, leadership becomes resonance. You don't push the room, you tune it. You don't micromanage people, you stabilize the field so others can rise. The story becomes, "Clarity creates clarity," or "I can lead from stillness." Strategies emerge that honor complexity rather than fear it, asking better questions, delegating with trust, responding rather than reacting. In ancient terms, this is the difference between ruling from the storm and ruling from the sky. In all three scenes, the turning point is the same. Your internal frequency precedes your external action. Breath state, state story, story strategy. This process isn't mystical, it is entirely human. And once you experience it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice when your old stories arise, when your breath contracts, when your body braces. But instead of collapsing into the loop, you step into the gap with awareness. You choose. You realign before midnight, not because of fear, but because coherence feels like truth. This turning point is not the end. It is the opening. The beginning of your life being shaped from the inside out. And to integrate this at the deepest level, we must widen the lens again toward meaning, dignity, and the quiet agency that lives in stillness. That brings us into our conclusion. At this stage of your journey, something subtle has begun to unfold, something you might not notice until you pause long enough to feel it. Beneath all the breathwork, the observer awareness, the metaphors of sky and river, something more human and more timeless is taking shape. You're beginning to remember your dignity. Not the dignity given by achievement or reputation, but the quiet dignity of simply being aware, being present, being part of this living field. There is a steadiness in you that doesn't depend on winning or proving or explaining. It comes from the recognition that you are not the turbulence you felt for so long. You are the sky that holds it. When you settle into this understanding, the world reveals a gentler texture. People who once seemed threatening or dismissive now appear as fellow travelers caught in their own loops. Situations that once felt like personal failures turn into invitations to deepen your alignment. Even your own mistakes soften. Instead of blaming yourself, you begin to see how each misstep taught you something essential about coherence. This shift is not perfection, it's maturity. The maturity of someone who knows that awareness is not a shield from difficulty, but a lantern that illuminates the path through it. Stillness, in this sense, becomes a kind of public art, not the stillness of withdrawal or indifference, but the stillness of someone who has learned to let their breath anchor them in the present rather than in old narratives. When you walk into a room from this place, others feel it. They don't know how to name it, but they sense the space around you, the space that says, you don't have to rush. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be afraid. In a world of noise, this kind of presence is rare. And rare things naturally attract attention, not because they are loud, but because they are authentic. You may not realize it yet, but you becoming more coherent helps others become more coherent. You becoming calmer helps others feel safer. You finding your inner stillness quietly rearranges the possibilities in every environment you touch. Not as a savior or a hero, those roles only recreate old patterns, but as a person who understands that every breath is a relationship with the field. That your presence alone can stabilize a moment without forcing it. This is agency without grandiosity, influence without domination, leadership without ego. And when you view your life through this lens, meaning begins to appear in ordinary moments, not in grand missions or cosmic destinies, but in the way you speak to someone when you're tired, the way you breathe before responding to conflict, the way you listen when someone needs to be heard. These small acts become extensions of your coherence, the same way ripples expand outward from a stone dropped into a lake. You realize that you matter not because of what you achieve, but because of the quality of the awareness you bring into each encounter. In a culture obsessed with outcomes, this is a radical remembering. Belonging shifts too. You stop trying to fit into spaces that demand you shrink. You stop abandoning your inner clarity to keep peace that isn't real. Instead, you cultivate relationships where your coherence is welcome, not threatened. And in those spaces, you feel something you may not have felt in years, that you are allowed to exist exactly as you are, without justification. This is the quiet liberation that emerges when you step out of the loop. The field stops echoing your fear and starts reflecting your alignment. There will still be storms. There will still be days when your breath tightens and your thoughts cloud. But now you know where home is. You know how to return to the observer, how to rest in the gap, how to breathe yourself back into the sky. And because you know this, you are no longer at the mercy of the moment. You can touch the still point in the midst of any situation, knowing that from that stillness, your next step will arise with clarity. That is the essence of freedom, not the absence of challenge, but the presence of awareness within it. So as you stand here, at the edge of another threshold. Take this truth with you. Coherence is not the destination, it is the way. Stillness is not the reward, it is the resource. And the field is not separate from you. It is shaped by the quality of your presence. You belong here not because you earned it, but because you are part of the same intelligence that breathes the world into motion. You are not a wave trying to reach the ocean. You are the ocean, remembering itself in the form of a wave. With this understanding alive in you, we enter the final moment of this journey, a ritualized alignment that seals this frequency into your system and prepares you for the next cycle. And when you're ready, we'll breathe together. Before we close, I want to guide you into a simple ritual, not a performance, not a ceremony in the theatrical sense, but a recalibration, a way of anchoring the state you've touched into something you can carry forward. Remember, this is educational, experiential, and symbolic. Nothing here is medical or prescriptive. It's a way of tuning your awareness so the field can reflect your clarity. So, settle for a moment. Feel the weight of your body where it meets the chair or floor. Let the shoulders drop just a few millimeters. Let the breath be exactly what it is. You're not trying to breathe correctly. You're letting breath return to its own intelligence. We'll take 3 coherent breaths together. On the first inhale, imagine your awareness widening like the sky remembering itself behind the clouds. On the exhale, let the body soften into that spaciousness. On the second inhale, feel the inner signal you've been broadcasting begin to clear, as if dust is settling back into the earth. On the exhale, release the tone of the old loop you've repeated for far too long. On the third inhale, breathe as if the field is listening, not judging, not demanding, simply receiving the quality of your presence. On the exhale, let the observer sit gently back into the center of your chest, where stillness naturally gathers. Now choose a word, not a slogan, not an affirmation, but a frequency, a tone you want to inhabit as the next cycle begins. It might be clarity, or trust, or presence, or courage, or any word that feels like alignment rather than aspiration. Don't overthink it. Let the word find you. When it arrives, hold it softly in your awareness the way you would hold a small flame between your hands. Take one more breath into that word. Feel how it shifts your posture, your expression, your internal rhythm. This is you tuning your own field. This is you stepping through the gate before midnight. Now, quietly or aloud, say this sentence. I choose to, your word, as the observer. Let the sentence settle into your body. Let the field register it not as a demand, but as a declaration of tone. This is your signature, your alignment, your next beginning. And if this journey has resonated with you, if something in you feels a little clearer, a little steadier, a little more awake, then subscribe to this frequency, not just to the channel, but to the practice of coherence itself. Let the ritual continue each time you return here, because the more people who breathe from alignment, the more the field shifts for all of us. You don't have to rush out of this state. You don't have to cling to it either. Just carry it with you the way a quiet melody lingers after the song ends. 3 breaths, 1 word, 1 declaration, and a new cycle begins.